Hello, welcome to Zigmatech Learning Hub. I'll be your instructor for biology. For this class, we are going to be taking our exercises from the ExamGuide app. Now, if you don't already have this installed in your device, I would like you to download the app in order to follow along in this class. Now, ExamGuide is a leading educational app that helps students prepare adequately for various exams. Exams such as the UTME, the post-UTME, WAEC, GCE, IJMB, KCPE, JUPEB, KCPE. In the junior sections, we also have the BECE, we have the SSCE, and so much more. Now, you can download the app from www.examguide.com or you visit the Google Play Store to download. Now, please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell to update yourselves on new videos that will be coming up. Now, if you're ready for this class, let's get started. Today, we're going to be looking at another exciting topic on tissues and supporting system part 2. Initially, we actually looked at the part 1 of tissues and supporting system, where we discussed about the definition of a skeleton. We also looked at the types of skeleton, and then we also talked about the mammalian skeleton, of which we divided it into two main parts. The first part, we called it the axial skeleton, which consists of the skull, consists of the vertebral column, also known as the backbone, and also consists of the ribs and the sternum. Today, we're going to be discussing more on the appendicular skeleton, which is the other part of the mammalian skeleton. But before we continue this discussion, I'd like us to look at some of the objectives we should take note of at the end of this lesson. So we have the objectives. By the end of this lesson, you are supposed to be able to mention the components of the appendicular skeleton. You should be able to also briefly describe the pectoral and pelvic girdle. You should also be able to describe the fore and hind limbs. The fore and hind limbs. You should also be able to describe the structure of and types of joints. Be able to describe the structure and the types of joints, and also explain how the muscles work, the operation of the muscles, how it works. And then finally, you should be able to mention some of the functions of the human skeleton, or you can say mammalian skeleton. Now, if you are set, let's begin. We're looking at the appendicular skeleton. We said something about the mammalian skeleton as a whole. We said it's divided into two parts. The appendicular skeleton is the second part of the mammalian skeleton. It consists primarily of what we call girdles and limbs. Girdles and limbs. And we will be discussing in details what girdles are all about, where they are located in the body of the skeleton, on where the limbs are and where they are also located. Now let's start with the first one, which has to do with the girdles. Now, the girdles in a mammalian skeleton is divided into two main parts, or we can say two types of girdles. Now, the first type of girdle is called the pectoral girdle. The pectoral girdle. And the second one is called the pelvic girdle. Pectoral, pelvic. Now, what is the pectoral girdle? The pectoral girdle actually is located at the forearm. You can see it closely to the shoulder. It is at the shoulder region. And the pectoral girdle consists of three important parts you should take note of. It consists of what we call the shoulder blade. The shoulder blade. Another name for shoulder blade is called scapula. If you take your hand backwards and try to touch the back of your bones, or the back of the bone, you will see a particular bone bulging out like a blade. That is the shoulder blade. And also, the pectoral girdle consists of what we call the coracoid. The coracoid is actually a small hook-shaped bone. And then it also consists of, or the pectoral girdle consists of the clavicle. The clavicle is actually, another name for the clavicle is called the collarbone. It is found at the collar region. So in other words, what we are trying to say is this. The pectoral girdle consists of three main parts. It consists of the scapula, which is also called the shoulder blade. It consists of the coracoid, and then it consists of the clavicle or collarbone. Now take a look at the structure of what we call the pectoral girdle. Now at the pectoral girdle, the pectoral girdle actually articulates with the humerus to form what we call the ball and socket joint, of which we're going to be looking at much more later. So you can see on the screen there, we have the scapula, we have what? The clavicle. The coracoid may not be seen because at the coracoid, that is where close to the coracoid, that is where you find the articulation of the humerus to the shoulder, all right? Now, the next type of girdle is called the pelvic girdle. The pelvic girdle. Now, the pelvic girdle is located at the waist. Remember, we said that the pectoral is located at the shoulder region, but the pelvic girdle is located at the waist region. Now, it consists of two main halves. If you check or look at the structure of the pelvic girdle, it consists of two main halves. And these two halves are united by a line. You'll find that there is a line that fuse these two halves together. That line is called the line of pubis symphysis. Line of pubis symphysis. Now, each half of the pelvic girdle consists of several parts. Now, we have about 3 bones that are found in each half of the pelvic girdle. Now, these bones are the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. I repeat, the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. Also, in each half of the pelvic girdle, we have what we call the obturator foramen. The obturator foramen. Now, the obturator foramen is actually a passage for muscles, nerves, and blood vessels. A passage for muscles, blood vessels, and nerves. And then another thing again that is located in each half of a pelvic girdle is what we call the acetabulum. Now, the acetabulum is actually a depression that creates an articulation for which the femur, which is called the longest and strongest bone of the body, fits in to form the hip joint. I repeat, the acetabulum is actually a depression that is found in each half of the pelvic girdle that creates a room, let me put it that way, for which the femur will fit into the pelvic girdle to form the hip joint, So like I said, in each half of a pelvic girdle, you have 3 bones, ilium, ischium, and pubis. We have the obturator foramen, and then we have the acetabulum. So these are the things you find in each half of the pelvic girdle. Now take a look at the structure we have there. Now you can see the pelvic girdle, you can see the ilium at the top of the pelvic girdle. You can see the acetabulum as a depression. You will have the ischium, the pubis, and this hollow you find there is what we call the obturator foramen. Okay. Now moving ahead, we said that the appendicular skeleton consists of girdles as well as limbs. Girdles and limbs. We have finished discussing the girdles. We said there are 2. We have the pelvic and we have the pectoral. But in terms of the limbs, we have 2 types of limbs. Now, limbs are for movement. And these 2 types of limbs, they include the fore limbs and the hind limbs. We have the fore limbs and the hind limbs. We're going to be discussing about the fore limbs and also the hind limbs. Now, take a look at what the fore limb is all about. Now, the forelimb can also be called your forearm. It is also called the forearm. Now, if you can listen to this, there is a way you can actually tell or explain what makes up the limbs for sure, the limbs. Now, if you understand this for the limbs, you can actually explain more, or you can actually explain better both forelimbs and hind limbs. Now, every limb in a mammalian skeleton consists of the following. It consists of a long bone. It consists of two short bones. It consists of either a wrist bone or an ankle bone based on the type of limb. It also consists of a foot bone and a palm bone based also on the type of limbs. And then it consists of digits, which contains phalanges. Okay, now let's take a look at what we have just described now for all the limbs and see how we can fit them into either forelimbs and then hind limbs. Now, the first thing we said, in each limbs there is a long bone. Now, in the forearm, the long bone is called the humerus. That is the bone that attaches to the shoulder blade, okay, or attaches to the pelvic girdle to form the ball and socket joint. So we have the humerus. Now, after the humerus, we have two short bones. And these two short bones, they lie side by side each other. They are called the radius and the ulna. The radius and the ulna. Now, after the radius and the ulna, we have the wrist bone. The wrist bone. And that wrist bone is called, in the forelimbs, it is called carpals. It is called the carpals. Now, after the carpals, we have the palm bone, the bones of the palm. Now, the palm bones, they are called the metacarpals. Now, after the metacarpals, you have digits. You have digits. In humans, humans are called pentadactyl, simply meaning that they have 5 digits. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 digits. Now, in each of these 5 digits, we have 3 phalanges. You can see it. There is a particular bone, a small bone here, 1, 2, and then 3. These are the phalanges. I repeat again. For the forelimbs, we have a long bone, which is called the humerus. We have 2 pairs of short bones, which lie side by side, which is the radius and the ulna. And then we have the wrist bone, which is called the carpals. We have the palm bone, which is called the metacarpals. We have the digits. And I told you the digits in humans, they are pentadactyl. Simply means that they have 5 digits. And each of these digits are made up of 3 small bones. And these bones are what we call the phalanges. All right? Now, having understood that, let's move to the next one, which is the hind limbs. Now, but before we go to the hind limbs, take a look at the structure we were actually discussing. We have the humerus. Now, after the humerus, we have the radius and the ulna. After the radius and the ulna, we have the carpals. After the carpals, you can see in the structure there on the screen there, we have the metacarpals. And after the metacarpals, we have the digits, which has phalanges. All right? Now, moving to the next is the hind limbs. The same thing we described concerning the forelimbs is also the same thing that is applicable to the hind limbs. So in the hind limbs, or the hind limbs is also known as the leg. Okay? Now, the hind limbs, they consist of a long bone. And this bone in the hind limbs is referred or regarded as the largest and strongest bone of the body. And that is the femur. The longest and strongest bone of the human body is called the femur. Now, after the femur, we have 2 short bones which also lie side by side, and they are called the tibia and fibula. Tibia and fibula. Now, between the tibia and fibula, we have, between the femur and the tibia and fibula, we have a bone or we have a joint, and that joint is called the knee joint. The knee joint. Now, the knee joint, at the knee joint, you'll find a kind of a small round bone like a cap covering the knee joint. That bone is what we call the kneecap. The kneecap. Another name for kneecap is called patella. Also in the forelimbs, we have also a joint between the humerus and the two short bones, which is the radius and the ulna, and that is the elbow joint. Also, we have in the hind limbs the joint between the femur and the tibia and fibula, or the two short bones. We have the knee joint covered by a kneecap, which we call patella. Now, after the two short bones, we have the ankle bone. The ankle bone is called the tarsals. After the tarsals, we have the feet bone. The feet bone is called the metatarsals. And after the metatarsals, we have the digits, which can also be called the toes. And then it also consists of phalanges. Now, take a look at what we're describing here. We have the femur, which is the long bone. We have the fibula and the tibia, which lie side by side each other. And you can see between the femur and the fibula, we have the knee joint, which consists of a round or small round bone, which is called the kneecap or patella. And then after the fibula and tibia and fibula, we have the tarsals, which is actually the ankle bone. And after the tarsals, we have the metatarsals. And after the metatarsals, we have the digits, which can also be called toes. And in these digits, we have the phalanges. Okay, so that is that about the hind limb. Now, moving ahead, we have also what we call joints. Joints. Now, what is a joint? You know, the first thing that comes to my mind when you talk about a joint, people call it as slangs, is a club. But that's not what we're actually looking at. We're actually looking at something relating to the bones. Now, what is a joint? A joint is a point where two or more bones meet or articulate. A point where two or more bones meet or articulate. Now, joints or bones are held together in a joint by a tissue. We call that a connective tissue. And this connective tissue is called the ligament. Please take note. A ligament is a connective tissue that holds bones together in a joint. Now let's take a look at a structure of a joint. The structure of a joint. Now you can see that this is the structure of a joint. There you can see the two bones. Okay, the two bones. And in the structure, we have a ligament, and you can see the ligament holding the bones together. And still in this same joint, we have what we call cartilage. We have the cartilage, and we're going to be looking at what the cartilage is all about. We have the synovial membrane, and then we have the synovial fluid. All right, now let's take a look at some of the things that makes up a joint. Based on the structure we have here, what are some of the parts that makes up the joint? Now, the joint consists of a ligament. And remember, we have said that a ligament is actually a connective tissue. It is flexible, elastic, and it's a tissue that holds two bones together in a joint. Number two is the tendons. Though it is not visible in the structure we have there, but please take note that a tendon is actually also a connective tissue that connects muscles to bones. It connects muscles to bones. When we come to muscles, we're going to lay a little emphasis on it again. It connects muscles to bones. Then number three, we have cartilage. If you could also remember, in our part 1, tissues and supporting systems, we talked about cartilage. And we said that one of the major functions of the cartilage is that it helps to reduce friction between bones. And one of the disadvantages of friction is is wearing and tearing of surfaces. So one of the major functions of the cartilage is to prevent wearing and tearing of surfaces of the bone during movement. So they act as a cushion to reduce friction. Next is the synovial fluid. Synovial membrane. Now, the synovial membrane is actually a membrane that is responsible for the secretion of the synovial fluid. Now, the synovial fluid is actually a lubricant. Synovial fluids are lubricants that act as shock absorbers. They act as shock absorbers. So the shock that is usually created during movement between bones is reduced and absorbed by the synovial fluid. Okay, so these are the parts of a joint. And so now, types of joints. Now we have about two main types of joint. We have what we call the movable joint, and we have the immovable joints. Movable joints and immovable joints. Now, what are movable joints? Movable joints are simply joints that allows movement between bones. Joints that allows movement within bones. Examples of movable joints include the joints at the shoulder, which we talked about. The joints at the shoulder. We have joints at the elbow and joints at the knee. I can move the bones, the joint. The joint is movable. The joint is movable. So that is what we call a movable joint. Now, immovable joints are joints that does not allow movement at all. They do not allow movement at all. And a better example for an immovable joint is the suture joint. The suture joint is the joint that is found at the skull. The skull. You can see that if you check a skull, you will see cracks on the skull. That is not just cracks. These are bones fused together. So there is a joining of bones at the skull. Now, these bones that are joined together don't move. It is immovable. There is no way movement can take place within those joints. So that is an example. Suture joint is an example of an immovable joint. Now let's take a look at some of the types of movable joints. Types of movable joints. We have just looked at an example of an immovable joint. Let's look at types of movable joints. Now there are basically 4 types of movable joints. 4 types, and we're going to be looking at these 4 types of movable joints. The first one on the roll is the ball and socket joint. You must have heard me say ball and socket joint when we were discussing the pectoral girdle. So ball and socket joint. Now this is a joint that allows movement in all direction. In all direction. You can see on the screen, in all direction. You can move your arm in all direction. I can move it up, down, sideways, and so on. This is called the ball and socket joint. And the ball and socket joints can be located at the shoulder and also at the hip. The shoulder and at the hip. That is where we can locate the ball and socket joint. Next on the line is the hinge joint. The hinge joint is a type of movable joint that allows movement in only one direction. Only one direction. And you can find it at the knee and also at the elbow. They allow only one direction at the knee and also at the elbow. Okay. Then we have number 3, which is the gliding joint. Gliding joint. Now it is a type of movable joint that allows the sliding or gliding of one bone over another. That's gliding or sliding of one bone over another. Now you can find it mostly at the wrist and also at the ankle. You can find it at the wrist, and the ankle. That is where you can get the gliding joint. And then finally, number 4, we have the pivot joint. Now, the pivot joint is actually a type of movable joint that allows the nodding and the rotation or rotating of parts of the body, mostly the head. And if you could recall, when we started discussing vertebral column, we talked about the atlas and the axis, which are the first two cervical vertebrae in the vertebral column. We said that they help for the nodding and the turning or rotating or twisting of the head. So where you can also see a pivot joint is the joint between the atlas and the axis in the cervical vertebra. So these are the types of movable joints we have. Now, move ahead. Let's take a look at what we call muscles. Remember, we talked about tendons, and we said that muscles attach themselves to the body, to the bones, by the help of a connective tissue we call tendons. Now, tendons are non-elastic tissues. They are not elastic, just like the ligaments. No, they are non-elastic. Now, bones on themselves or by themselves can't bring about movement. No. Movement, in fact, is possible in bones with the aid of the muscles. Like I said, and I'll repeat it again, movement is not just only possible within bones. It is possible when there is an addition or there is an aid of the muscles, when the muscles are involved. Now, muscles are connective tissues that attach to bones at 2 points. The first point is called the origin of the muscles. The origin of the muscles. And this origin of the muscles attached to an immovable bone. While we have the other one, which is called the insertion, that is the other point, it attaches to a movable bone. Now, take a look at what the structure of muscles are. That is a muscle. It covers the bones. It covers the skeleton and aids movement in the skeleton. Now, let's look at how the muscles work. How does the muscles work? Now, it is important to understand that muscles occur in pairs. Muscles in the bodies occur in pairs. And though they occur in pairs, they work antagonistic to each other, or they act antagonistic to each other. Remember, we are looking at how the muscles work. Muscles work antagonistically to each other. That means when one is contracting, the other one will be relaxing. When one is relaxing, the other contracts. An example is the muscles at the forearm. The muscles at the forearm, we have the biceps, which is on top, and then we have the triceps. Now, for movement to take place in the forearm, the biceps must contract, and when the biceps is actually contrasting, just like we have said that they work antagonistic to each other, as the biceps contract, the triceps will relax. Right now, my biceps is relaxing, and it simply means my triceps are contracting. And when the biceps relax and triceps contracts, the arm straightens. The arm straightens. Now, for the arm to bend, for the arm to bend, the biceps will contract while the triceps will relax. So the bending and the straightening, bending and straightening of the forearm or the forelimbs is movement. That's movement. And that is how the muscles work, antagonistic to each other. Okay? Now, you can see it there on the screen. When you bend your arm, the biceps contracts, the triceps relaxes. When you straighten your arm, the biceps relaxes, and then the triceps contract. Now, finally for today, functions of the skeleton. Functions of the skeleton. Now, we have several functions of the skeleton. Let's take a little few. Now, one, it gives rigidity and support to the body. The skeleton gives rigidity and support to the body. You can also see that in the definition of a skeleton. Number two, it gives shape to the body. Number three, it gives protection, or it provides protection for important and delicate organs of the body. Number four, it aids in the movement of the body. We have seen that with the help of the muscles. It aids movement of the body. Number 5, it aids in respiration. Very true. And that has to do with the ribs. Remember we talked about the ribs? We said one of the functions of the ribs, not just for protecting the heart and the lungs, it also aids in what? Respiration. When you breathe in, your rib cage grows up and outward. And when you breathe out, it falls down and goes inwards, okay? So the ribs is also a part of the skeleton and it aids in respiration. Another important function of the skeleton is that it helps in the storage of mineral salt. It helps in the storage of mineral salt. So the last function of the skeleton we're going to be considering today is that the skeleton aids in the manufacturing of the red blood cells or the blood cells. Now, the part of the bones that is responsible for manufacturing of blood cells is the bone marrows. The bone marrows aids in the manufacturing of mostly the red blood cells. So these are the functions of the skeleton. And this brings us to actually the end of this particular topic. But before we go, I'd like us to take a look at some questions to evaluate ourselves and see if we actually understood this particular topic. Now, evaluations. Now, let's take a look at very few of them, and I'm going to be very bit fast on this. Which of the following provides articulation for the head of the femur? Now, remember that the femur is located at the leg or the forelimbs. We said it is the longest and hardest bone. Now, which one articulates, provides the articulation? Now, for the articulation to take place, the hip bone, which is the pelvic girdle, must be involved. A, is it the obturator foramen? B, is it the acetabulum? C, is it the ilium? D, is it the scapula? No. Let's start with option D. Option D is wrong. Scapula. Scapula is found at the pectoral girdle. So it has nothing to do with the pelvic girdle. Option C says the ilium. The ilium is one of the bones. One of the bones in the pelvic girdle, one half of the pelvic girdle. It has nothing to do with the provision of articulation for the head of the femur. Then option B is the acetabulum, which is the correct answer. The acetabulum is actually a depression that provides articulation for the head of the femur. Option A is the obturator foramen. And we said the obturator foramen is actually a passage for the muscles, the nerves, as well as the blood vessels. Question 2, the type of joint that allows for the nodding and the rotating of one part over another is what? The ball and socket joint does not allow for rotation. It doesn't allow for nodding. It only allows movement in all directions. B is gliding joint. Gliding joint is a joint that allows one bone to slide or glide over another. Now, hinge joint allows movement of bones in only one direction. Just one direction, not rotating. Now, the one that helps in the rotation is the pivot joint, which is the joint between the atlas and then the axis. Question 3, the muscles found at the forearm. The forearm are, the muscles that are found there, they are the biceps and the triceps. Tibia and fibula, which is option A, is not a muscle, but a bone. B, radius and ulna is also a bone. Option D, tricuspid and bicuspid valve, they are valves that are found in the heart. It has nothing to do with the muscles of the hand, of the arm, of the forearm. Tricuspid, bicuspid valves are located at the heart. And then number 4, which of the following acts as a shock absorber? Acts as a shock absorber. The correct option is the synovial fluid. Now, before we go, let's take a look at least 1 or 2 questions from our ExamGuide app. All right, now take a look at this question. Start. Now, look at this. They said, which of the following will ease the friction between ends of bones in a movable joint? Ease friction. Ease friction. The correct option is A, which is the synovial fluid, not tissues, not blood plasma, not serum. Okay. Next, we have Muscles are attached to bones by means of what? It is not a cartilage. Synovial membrane, they only produce or secrete synovial fluid. Ligament attach bones to bones and hold them together. Cartilage serves as a pad or a cushion that helps to reduce friction. The correct option is tendons. And then finally, the next one is, which of the following is true about movement of the forearm? Movement of the forearm. Movement of the forearm. Now take a look at this question. Option A says, straightening the arm, the biceps relaxes and the triceps contracts. Is it true? B, bending the arm, the biceps contracts and the triceps relax. They said the question is that which of the following is true about the forearm? So bending the arm, the biceps contracts, the triceps relaxes. And C, bending the arm, the biceps relaxes and the triceps contracts. And D, straightening the arm, the biceps contracts and the triceps relaxes. The correct option, if you see option A, it says straightening the arm, the biceps relaxes and the triceps contract, which is also correct. And then option B, they said bending the arm, the biceps contracts, which is correct, and then the triceps relaxes. So we have two answers there, which is option A and option B. Thank you for participating in today's class. You can practice more questions using your ExamGuide app. The app scores and gives a detailed explanation of all the questions at the end of your practice test. You can also learn particular topics of interest with different modes like study mode, mock mode, and even practice mode. It also has other features that makes learning very fun. Now, it is a must for all serious students. Download from www.examguide.com if you don't have it yet. See you in the next class. Don't forget to subscribe to our channels, hit the notification bell, and share the videos to your loved ones and friends that will benefit from it. Bye for now.